Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on today's LinkedIn Live. We are talking about the latest findings from NAMI Stigma Free Workplaces' third annual workplace mental health poll. We are so excited to go over the findings with y'all. And we're looking at what the data tells us about how workplaces can better support everyone's mental health. My name is Meg Delp. I am the Director of Workplace Mental Health with NAMI, and today I am joined by Amy, who has been a part of the process for everything that we're talking about today. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Meg, so much for inviting me to join you today. I'm Amy Young, Director of Data Analysis and Evaluation at NAMI National. I've spent over a decade of my career in the research, evaluation, and data space, and was previously a family systems therapist. At NAMI, I co-lead our data team, where our primary purpose is really to help NAMI collect and also use data intentionally to drive our mission forward. So I'm really excited to be talking to you about all things data and workplace mental health today.
Fabulous. Fellow family therapist. We love it. So, we are going to be talking today about a few trends we're seeing in the workplace as it relates to mental health. We now have 3 years of data, which is pretty awesome. So we can see how those numbers are going up, going down, staying the same. And then we will also be talking about one practical solution, hint, it's by NAMI, that organizations can use right now to help their employees learn how to start the mental health conversation at work. And yeah, let's dive in. Amy, where do we want to start today?
Cool. So I'll just kick us off with a little bit of an orientation to the survey that was conducted by our partners at Ipsos. The survey is administered to a nationally representative sample of full-time adult employees every year. As you just mentioned, this was our third year running it, and we received over 2,000 responses from employees really in a wide range of industries. That's really exciting. This poll, its primary purpose really aims to help us understand the current state of workplace mental health. So, what folks are experiencing, what resources exist, and where there are potential gaps in the workplace.
Amazing. Yeah, I get so excited about this poll every single year. We are big on our data at NAMI. And also, this poll has been incredibly crucial for us at NAMI as we really work to strengthen our stigma free workplace initiative. We want to make sure everything we do is driven by data and really addresses the needs of what employees are saying they actually are looking for in the workplace. NAMI is all about the lived experience of folks. And so this survey is a really invaluable way to gather just so many voices and learn about what they are feeling in the workplace, what the culture of their workplaces feel like, how they view leadership, just so much information. So diving in, Amy, what stood out to you the most in this year's data?
Yeah, so I always get really excited when we talk about nationally representative data sets because it really does provide you with a very good and like holistic pulse check on how things are. And there are a few things that stood out to me when we were looking at some of the results. First, I think employees continue to feel stressed about the state of the world. This is probably not very surprising. Women, younger workers, and folks who identify as LGBTQ plus report even higher rates of stress. The good news is that folks still see mental health as an appropriate topic to talk about in the workplace. There is still acceptance that, this is conversations or topics that are really appropriate and approachable and fit in a workplace setting. But understandably, employees are more comfortable talking to their colleagues and their coworkers or friends at work about their mental health and least comfortable talking about mental health with their senior leaders. Unfortunately, we're also seeing that comfort gap grow wider over the years that we've had this data, meaning that employees are increasingly more likely to turn to a peer or someone or a colleague than someone that's in a role above theirs. The other thing that I'll point out and that we'll talk a little bit more later on is that mental health training really matters. This is something that we actually see data to support with from our poll results. And one of the pieces that really stood out to me was that employees are much more likely to feel supported and that their mental health matters and is a priority at companies that offer trainings.
We love to hear that training is important. We know that raising awareness, building out education is just so vital. And what we can also kind of take from this data is that we're at this really cool inflection point where we see that people believe this conversation is important, but that's not translating into a consistently supportive employee experience where they then actually engage in that conversation. And so this gap between peer support and leadership is really telling. It suggests that while the culture might be shifting on the surface, many employees are still making real time decisions. We could say, closely linked to psychological safety, perhaps, where there is that sense of vulnerability being safe. And they're asking themselves, is it safe for me to say this here to this person? And it seems like very often the answer is no when it comes to someone who has influence or power over their role, performance, career. I mean, that can feel really scary. So as we look at this data, we're seeing a real opportunity to move from that passive support, saying, hey, we believe mental health is important, to active skill building. Like, okay, we know it's important. What do we do with that? So really learning those mental health related skills, it changes the day-to-day interactions. Managers can learn how to recognize signs of distress in their employees. We can all learn ways to respond to our colleagues in a way that builds trust and more of that connection without overstepping. We're not inviting everyone to be therapists at the workplace. It's really just about creating that support. But more importantly, it really helps close that trust gap, because the goal isn't to replace peer support. It is to really make sure that support exists at every level of the organization, because we know that when we see leadership really taking those real vulnerable steps, it does help other employees feel safe to do so as well. So looking even further at the numbers, what did our survey say about whether people feel comfortable talking about mental health at work?
Yeah, so I think something that we've noticed year over year is that, folks really recognize that mental health is an appropriate topic to talk about in the workplace. More specifically, 3 in 4 employees recognize that. But again, we also see sort of this disconnect between recognizing that mental health is something that's important to talk about in the workplace and actually being comfortable doing that. So comfort levels are still lagging behind despite this recognition. Folks are much more comfortable talking about other aspects of their personal life or their identity, things like physical health or gender identity, than they would be about talking about their mental health concerns at work. You might be wondering, what are the things that sort of drive that discomfort? In the data, we saw that stigma, judgment, silence, and even perception of weakness continue to be those primary drivers of discomfort, even though, over 75% of employees say that they would be comfortable if a coworker approached them about their mental health. So this receptiveness of being able to welcome sort of that approach from a colleague, but being disconnected from your own personal sort of willingness or being able or comfortable or confident to be able to take that initiative yourself to go to a colleague. We really see a big difference there. So there is still, really that disconnect between awareness and actually seeing it in the workplace and being willing to take action. Folks are increasingly year over year more comfortable supporting colleagues. And many actually have done so from the data that we received from the results from our poll. But many haven't received any training at all for it. So they're not necessarily equipped to provide that support, even if they are doing it already in the workplace.
Yeah, and that's so important, that feeling of being prepared to support someone that you care about in the workplace when they come to you with their mental health concern or with any concern, right? So we want to feel like we know what those next steps are. How do we support someone without accidentally saying something that is more stigmatizing? And that gap between wanting to help, knowing how to help, and then feeling comfortable to ask for help, we are seeing the numbers are really showing that alongside HR, employees believe that their direct manager or supervisor is responsible for creating that environment where mental health feels safe to talk about. And it's a strong majority. About 84% believe that their manager does have some responsibility or all responsibility to help create that culture. So employees are really looking to their managers as a key part of the experience of feeling more comfortable. We also know, touching on that training again, that fewer than 3 in 10 managers have actually received training about how to talk about mental health. So we have this moment where expectations of managers are quite high and the preparation and support they're receiving is low, which is going to have implications. We know that managers are in a bit of a sticky spot, right? They have accountability to keep, they have productivity and timelines, all of these things that help the company keep moving while also having to keep their team morale up, making sure that their employees have the things that they need. And these things all go together, but it still is, it can be a sticky spot to be in. And so, because these managers are in that sticky spot, our poll also found that they are experiencing higher levels of burnout when they don't have access to resources that support them. So managers themselves are not immune to what we're talking about, right? They also have mental health. They also can feel burned out. They also can feel overwhelmed. And when we ask them to also then support their teams, that adds so much pressure. So Amy, I'd love to bring you in more to talk about what you're seeing when it comes to the stress and burnout trends, because those are incredibly telling about where employees are today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Meg, just like you said, it is managers, but it's also not just managers. So in terms of our like results from the poll, 7 in 10 employees are feeling stressed about the state of the world, and unfortunately, this is a rate that we've seen sustained year over year. I think something that is even more concerning that we saw this year is that the proportion of employees feeling very stressed grew by about 11 percentage points since 2024. Um, and it's not just the state of the world, it's also internal and interpersonal factors. Folks are reporting significantly more concern about their own personal physical health, their personal stress, their work life balance, their mental health, and also their coworkers' mental health. So, this has impacts on the way that we show up in the workplace, both for ourselves personally and also in the way that we show up for our colleagues and the work relationships that we have. And we see similar, patterns with burnout too, with over 50% of employees across industries feeling burnt out because of their job. While there isn't maybe things that we can do to influence or change the state of the world, at least right away, I think there are definitely some things that we can do, actions that we can take to create more supportive workplaces, to minimize how much our work and our workplaces really contributes to that stress and burnout.
Absolutely. And seeing these numbers, I mean, stress, burnout, this is a workforce sustainability issue. We know we'd have the data that when stress and burnout go unaddressed, organizations will feel it. Our survey found that about 6% of folks who experienced declining mental health last year actually resigned from their job. And we only surveyed folks who were currently working. So that means they resigned within the past year and also recovered enough to find a new job. So that's likely not fully representative of how many people actually left their job. And when we have this higher rate of turnover, which that number goes up if you're a caregiver, specifically if you're in the sandwich generation, but we know retention really affects employee morale. We see decreased engagement and productivity with burnout. When people disengage, it has that ripple effect. And so when we find ways to support folks instead of punishing them or disciplining them or, looking right away to that sense of like they're doing something wrong and instead say, how can I support this person? We know that's going to make a humongous impact and keep that morale up, help the person get back on their feet, and really engage and work in a way that feels good for everyone. And we all know that we want meaningful support. So support that actually makes sense for us. We want resources, tools, leaders who are prepared to have supportive conversations when any of us might be struggling. So let's talk about how our data really helps us answer whether people feel equipped to support mental health at work, and kind of moving into what we want to do with that data.
Yeah, so I think what's really important to highlight is that what does support look like, right? We've already talked about sort of all of these different influencing factors, and support. So support isn't just about addressing maybe challenges at work or workload. It's also about recognizing that there are other factors in the state of the world outside of the workplace that are influencing our stress and burnout experiences. So I think I'm going to answer your question by breaking it down into a couple of different parts. Do employees have the resources to sort of support their own mental health at work? So thinking about, do we have the things that we need to be able to make sense of all the things that are happening, both in and around the world and also in our workplaces that might be contributing to our stress or experience of stress? And then do we know then, do employees know how to support others once they've been able to sort of have the resources to support their own personal mental health? So the vast majority of the employees in our poll know that their companies offer health insurance. But what was, maybe what was surprising to me and maybe surprising to others is that nearly a quarter really don't know if they have any kind of mental health benefits at all. So this looks like, access to employee assistance programs, EAPs, or whether or not they can even use their sick days for mental health reasons. I think that this lack of awareness in what I would call really fundamental mental health benefits really speaks to whether or not employees feel equipped or not, in terms of, do they even know what resources that they might have access to already to support their own personal mental health. And maybe related to that, and maybe unsurprisingly, only about 54% felt that their companies made employee mental health a priority. So it is not too shocking that we have sort of potential low awareness of resources and benefits that already exist, and this feeling of not necessarily companies feeling like they are prioritizing their employees mental health. So I think that that's something definitely to look at. And then in terms of helping others, many employees, and we've talked about this already, are concerned about their coworkers' mental health, and they're concerned about them. They want to help, but they don't always have, the training or the confidence to be able to do that. Only about a third of employees have received training about mental health resources. Managers, we've talked a bit already about how managers always have this, often have this feeling of additional pressure, of expectations, given their role and potentially leadership responsibilities. They might feel responsible for supporting their teams, and either initiating those conversations about mental health or being able to help their teams navigate through those challenges, but they feel underprepared. So less than a third have received training from their employer on how to talk about mental health with their teams. And then even when training is offered, it doesn't always meet the needs. So only about 57% of employees who received training on mental health felt that it helped them feel more comfortable talking to their coworkers about mental health. So there may still be a need for improved training, even when training already exists in the workplace. All of this says to me that there is a lot more that we can do to equip folks in the workplace and create a more positive culture around supporting mental health, for employees really at all levels, but especially I think those in roles that already have expectations, have that added pressure to lead and support others.
Absolutely. And before we really dive into training, because I'm super excited to do that, jumping back to the mental health benefits for a moment, when I was a practicing therapist, I remember most of the new clients I got, I really had to coach them on how their benefits worked. They may not have known what a deductible was, what out of network meant, that they could submit claims on their own, that, all of these things. The common person who's not in HR, not in the healthcare world, they might not know what the terms are, even if they know they have access to insurance. So there's many different layers to making sure a person really understands what they have access to, what the costs are going to be. And HR can play a really, really great role in making sure their employees are fully prepared to use the benefits that they work so, so hard to procure for their employees. Even just creating, a handout with all the different terms with insurance. Actually, we have one on our Stigma Free website. We can drop that link in the chat. But making sure that even just the terms are understandable and people can access the benefits that they have, just so, so, so important. And just making sure people know, maybe even quarterly, that they are going to get that explanation of what do I have access to, how do I access it, when would I use it, who is this for? That can be so, so important. Okay,
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
jumping over to training, because training is obviously important. Our survey has shown year over year over year that people do believe training is important. And what we're seeing across organizations is that the intentions are there. They're good intentions, I'm sure. But without the right support, people don't always know what to say or how to show up for their fellow colleagues. And that uncertainty can actually keep the conversation from happening at all. I know when my colleague Britt and I do presentations, something we often hear from folks is that they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing and making it worse. So then they just don't say anything. And so it hurts my therapist heart, because we want to be able to show up for people we care about. So when we engage in training, when we offer employees training that actually normalizes conversations about mental health, can really help that feeling of discomfort or unease, or even it feeling kind of taboo. And it helps make it more part of just everyday workplace dialogue. When employees hear that consistent language, they see leaders engaging in these conversations, they can really start understanding that this is just a part of life. We all have mental health. It comes with us to work. It is impacted by work, by home, at both places. And when we can talk about that and make it maybe even part of the workflow, my stress levels are really high. That's going to impact how I engage with work. Manager, how do I prioritize my workload over the next few days so that I know exactly what's expected of me and whether or not it's realistic? Incorporating those mental health conversations can really shift the culture in a meaningful way for both the employee and the overall organization. Training can also provide really practical language and tools, and this is super critical because most employees and managers are not mental health professionals. Amy and I are, but that is besides the point. Employees don't need to be to have this conversation, but they do need to know how to recognize when someone might be struggling, and then how to respond in a way that is supportive and appropriate for the workplace. Sometimes it's as simple as just giving people a few phrases they can rely on. My favorite one, a great way to validate what someone has just told you: it makes sense that you feel that way. It's not saying you understand it. It's not saying you agree with it even. It makes sense for that person that they are feeling that way. And that can be just those few simple words can make someone feel so much more seen. So when we have that training, when our confidence increases, we feel equipped, we're going to engage more, we're more likely to do the thing that is feeling more difficult. But when we're more willing to check in with our colleagues, to listen, to support one another, it's going to make a difference. It's going to have ripple effects across the organization. Managers will be more likely to lean into the conversations instead of avoiding them. They'll know how to have those supportive conversations rather than moving right to discipline. And over time, we'll see that culture turn into something that feels more supportive rather than sitting in that mental health stigma. So training it's not just about increasing awareness. It's about creating that consistency, building capability, and making sure that support for mental health really shows up in everyday interactions. To answer this call, we at NAMI developed a new training called You Can Ask by NAMI. It is a free, virtual, interactive training designed to help employees and managers learn how to check in, start supportive conversations, and connect people to help. It's really designed to help employees and managers feel more comfortable starting the conversation. It focuses on the simple, powerful idea that you don't need to have all the answers to show up for someone. You really just need to know how to be there and how to listen. It is a story-based training, so it is actually kind of fun. It walks you through how to recognize when someone might be struggling, how to check in, and then the next steps after that, right? We want to make sure that people know that they have access to resources. Ultimately, it is the goal to just have people feel like mental health, you can approach it in a practical and approachable way in the workplace. And so, we want workplaces to feel like people are safe asking for help, and where support really shows up in everyday moments rather than just once a year at open enrollment, or if a speaker comes by and it's a great webinar, but then where does that conversation go throughout the year? We want this to show up in everyday moments between colleagues.
Yeah, I really liked what you said, Meg, about providing folks with practical language and tools. I think so often when we're learning something new, one of the most effective things that we can have is a model to work off of. So being able to see something, react to it, and whether or not we're going to choose to use that specific language, or whether or not we're going to end up experiencing that specific circumstance that we see being modeled to us, it really helps to have something to sort of anchor our response, or to be able to start processing, well, if I do find myself in a similar situation, how might I respond that is either the same or different than the way that this training modeled for me? And so being able to have that framework, I think is super, super helpful. I think when we're learning really anything, but I think particularly in this context, we're learning how to engage with others, we're learning how to have those supportive conversations. If you've never been in that circumstance, or you've never seen that modeled for you, it can be really hard to know exactly what it is that you might be looking for. There's that saying, it's like, you don't know what you don't know until you see it. So I'm really excited that this training particularly is story-based, because I think it does a lot of that modeling for us. And the thing is, like, most employees do feel that mental health training will benefit them in the workplace. And this is something that we've actually seen evidence for in our poll results. That employees at companies that offer trainings really report better workplace support, leadership. They're less concerned about stigma, and they are also far more likely to feel that their company prioritizes their mental health and provides resources to support it and improve it. Managers with proper resources and training are far more likely to feel prepared to support their team's mental health and well-being. So trainings, overall have a really positive effect, whether you're a manager or not. They really improve workplace culture and help folks in management roles in particular feel prepared to support their teams and help them navigate through those circumstances.
Yes, all that data is so amazing. Training really can be just such a beautiful benefit to company culture. And we did want to try to make this training fun and interesting. And so please check it out. We put a lot of love, maybe some tears, into this training, and we are so proud of it. We'll drop the link in the chat so y'all can check it out. We really encourage y'all to check out. Even we have so much data for everyone to read through. So please dive into the data, ask us questions about it. We love talking about it. But also check out the training. They are both great options for y'all to really dive into this conversation more. And if you feel like, hey, I want to know more about this, you can always reach out to us, stigmafree@nami.org. We know that trainings can really help employees feel more confident, and so we wanted to create one that might be able to help folks along their way. So, Amy, any final takeaway for our guests today?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this training. I'm excited that we are, we're able to share it. I think it launched last week. The data and the results that we received really demonstrate that employees at all levels and in all industries want to promote positive mental health and awareness and wellness in the workplace. But there is still, a gap that exists between that need and what currently exists. And I just really think that trainings like You Can Ask by NAMI are a great and accessible way to fill that gap and supplement potentially existing trainings that already exist in your workplace.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amy. It has been such a delight working with you on both of these projects over the past year. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for being part of building workplaces that support mental health. You can find both our training and our survey results on stigmafree.nami.org. And I hope to hear from y'all with questions, comments, fun data from your own organization. We love it all. So please reach out, join us for next month's LinkedIn Live. Thank you all so much for joining today.